After Canadian prophet Roch Theriault formed the Anthill Kids in 1977, they became a doomsday-obsessed group who lived on a remote commune in Quebec and prepared for the impending apocalypse. Their beliefs may have been bizarre, but there was little illegal activity or violence to speak of. However, as Roch Theriault grew more controlling and his drinking problem got worse, life inside the Anthill Kids took a much darker turn. Not only did Theriault marry and impregnate all of his female followers, but he soon began subjecting everyone, including the children, to an increasingly horrific array of torture. He beat them with everything from belts to hammers to axes, while also forcing them to brutalize each other with shotgun blasts. Meanwhile, he would defecate on his followers and force them to eat feces as well as dead mice. And things only got worse before Theriault was finally captured in 1989. This is the gruesome story of Roch Theriault and the Anthill Kids. Born into a family of 7 children on May 16, 1947, in Quebec, Roch Theriault endured a tumultuous life from the very start. He claims to have been abused by his father, but evidence of abuse has never been found. The family was devoutly Catholic, and young Theriault developed a strong hatred for the religion. During his childhood, Theriault abandoned formal education and began studying the Old Testament. He firmly believed that a cosmic conflict between forces of good and evil would occur in 1979, and that an apocalypse would destroy the world. In his teenage years, he displayed signs of aggression, including violent outbursts at friends and family members. It was also around this time when he developed a bad drinking habit, which only got worse over the course of his life. Using the alias Moise, Roch Theriault eventually declared himself a prophet, and in 1977, he founded the Anthill Kids, a doomsday cult rooted in the beliefs of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The group inhabited a remote plot of land nestled deep within the wilderness in the Somerville township of Quebec. Roch Theriault persuaded his followers in the Anthill Kids to abandon their lives and join his religious movement. He convinced them to sell all of their possessions, sever family ties, and relocate to his commune. Through Theriault's strong leadership, the followers began preparing for the impending apocalypse, which they believed would occur in February 1979. Their leader didn't allow much contact with the outside world, but they did sell handmade crafts and baked goods in order to fund their new way of life. Theriault then told all the women that they were his wives and should bear his children. Ultimately, he had 8 wives and eventually fathered a total of 23 children within the commune. But polygamy was just the beginning. Over time, the Anthill Kids began engaging in extreme religious practices, including self-mutilation and corporal punishment. Roch Theriault's followers suffered both severe physical and sexual abuse, including being burned with a welding torch and having their fingers cut off with wire cutters. Roch Theriault's reign of terror worsened as he claimed divine authority and performed brutal acts of violence, including amputations, branding, and even murder, all in the name of religious purification. As Theriault's paranoia and drinking problem worsened, he became increasingly authoritarian, imposing severe restrictions on his followers' lives. Anthill Kids members were forbidden from interacting with each other without his presence, and even sexual activity required his approval. To ensure his followers were completely devoted to him, he enforced uniform tunics to symbolize equality within the commune. Far worse, he committed horrific acts of mutilation, including amputating the arm of one of his concubines and removing 8 of her teeth. He was also accused of castrating a 2-year-old boy and an adult man. Theriault's punishments for perceived disobedience were extremely cruel. He used physical and psychological torture, such as painstakingly plucking out body hairs, suspending individuals from the ceiling, and even defecating on them. The abuse soon extended to children, who suffered sexual assault, burning, and having rocks thrown at them while they were nailed to a tree. And whenever someone attempted to leave the Anthill Kids, Theriault would beat them with belts or hammers. Cult member Gabrielle Lavallee suffered immensely at the hands of Roch Theriault when he snapped off one of her fingers, sawed through her arms with a hunting knife, removed one of her breasts, and fractured her skull with an axe. She would soon expose the horrors of the Anthill Kids, but not before a final series of atrocities, perhaps worse than anything that had come before. In 1989, Roch Theriault's Anthill Kids cult finally unraveled when one of his own wives, Solange Boillard, died during a gruesome attempt at surgery performed by him. She had been complaining of abdominal pain, so Theriault told her to take off her clothes, and he began punching her in the stomach. Next, he told her he was going to perform an enema by shoving a tube up her rectum and filling her up with olive oil. He then laid her down, cut open her stomach, and forced another cult member to pull out some of her intestines before stitching her closed again. The horrifying ordeal unsurprisingly caused Boillard's death. However, Theriault wasn't done torturing her. He told his members that he could resurrect her. After drilling a hole into her skull, he forced the other male followers to ejaculate into the cavity. Then he took his turn. When that didn't bring her back to life, Theriault removed one of her ribs and wore the bone around his neck as a souvenir before the group buried her on the compound. Following Boillard's death, Lavallee managed to escape and reported the Anthill Kids to the authorities, leading to a full police investigation. Canadian law enforcement launched a manhunt for what was now one of the country's most infamous criminals. After going into hiding, Roch Theriault was eventually caught and arrested on multiple counts of assault and manslaughter, and the Anthill Kids cult soon dissolved. In 1993, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for Boillard's death and was sentenced to life in prison. But even after being captured, Roch Theriault fathered 4 more children with remaining female followers from the Anthill Kids during conjugal visits. He also made headlines in 2009 when he attempted to sell his artwork through a true crime auction house. On February 26, 2011, at the age of 63, Theriault met a violent end in Dorchester Penitentiary when his cellmate, Matthew Gerard MacDonald, a convicted murderer, stabbed him to death. MacDonald then told a guard, "That piece of esh is down on the range. Here's the knife, I've sliced him up." The tyrannical cult leader's reign of terror was over. As reported by the CBC, MacDonald was already serving life in prison for murder, and the Crown only hands out life sentences for murderers, so he was not given any additional time for killing Theriault. Hours before her death, someone asked 22-year-old Yeardley Love how things were going with her on-again, off-again boyfriend, George Huguely. "Same old stuff," Love replied. "Everything is good." Yet that night, Huguely would kick down her door in a drunken rage and beat her to death. Though Yeardley Love's murder shocked the nation, and even George Huguely himself, who was allegedly so drunk that he hardly remembered what he'd done, the subsequent investigation into their relationship found a number of warning signs. Huguely had been violent toward Love before, and, in an email he sent after one of their breakups, even told her that he should have killed you. So what exactly happened between Yeardley Love and George Huguely on May 3rd, 2010, the night of her tragic death? This is the haunting story of George Huguely, from his privileged beginnings to how he murdered his girlfriend in a drunken rage, to where he is today. Born on September 17, 1987, George Huguely came from a long line of successful George Hugleys. Huguely's great-grandfather founded the prosperous company Gallagher and Huguely in 1912, which long provided construction supplies to the Washington, D.C. area. The success of the company allowed the family to invest in racehorses and property, and it opened doors to country clubs and yacht clubs. Huguely's father was a self-employed investor, his mother a part-time model at Saks Fifth Avenue, and Huguely attended prestigious private schools. Reports state that Huguely enrolled in the elite Landon School starting in 9th grade, where he quickly gained a reputation for his brazen confidence. Huguely bet his freshman year football coach that he'd make a big play in exchange for a kiss from the coach's fiancée. Huguely made the play, and once stole his lacrosse coach's car keys. To gales of laughter from his teammates, Huguely drove the car onto the lacrosse field. At the University of Virginia, George Huguely continued to play lacrosse, but wasn't the star he had been in high school. He also started showing tendency toward anger and drunkenness. In 2008, Huguely got in a fight with his father aboard their yacht, while the family was in Palm Beach. Huguely leapt from the boat into the water and refused to return. That same year, he was arrested after a police officer found him stumbling drunk in traffic. When she confronted the 6'1", 200-pound Huguely, he threatened her and used racial and sexual epithets. The officer had to use her taser to subdue him, and Huguely later pleaded guilty to resisting arrest and public intoxication. His attorney admitted that Huguely had been just so drunk. He did not remember doing or saying any of those things, really. Meanwhile, Huguely had started to go out with a lacrosse player named Yeardley Love, but their relationship would ultimately come to a deadly end. George Huguely and Yeardley Love dated for 2 years, on and off, and had a volatile relationship. Huguely's excessive drinking strained things between them, and Huguely was often violent. In February 2009, he attacked a teammate in his sleep because he'd heard that the teammate had walked Love home. A year later, Huguely choked Love at a lacrosse victory party. A player from North Carolina heard Love cry, "Help! I can't breathe," and found Huguely with his hands around her neck. Afterward, Love went home to Baltimore to get away from Huguely. But reports state that they continued to travel in the same social circles and were seen together in the weeks leading up to Love's death. One friend said that Huguely was trying to get back on her good side after the assault. Behind closed doors, however, things remained strained. On April 30th, 2010, Huguely sent Love an angry email about a relationship she'd had with another man and wrote, "I should have killed you." Though the two continued to send angry emails to each other, they began to reconcile. On May 2nd, they were even seen together holding hands. By then, however, Huguely had been drinking non-stop for almost 30 hours following his final lacrosse game of senior year. His attorney later said that a conservative estimate would be that Huguely had 45 to 50 drinks during that time. And when Huguely went to Love's apartment at around 11:45 p.m. that night, things quickly got out of hand. Though Huguely later claimed that he went to see Love just to talk, prosecutors later argued that things got violent between the two almost immediately. Prosecutors claimed that Huguely had kicked down Love's door, then reached inside so that he could unlatch it. He then grabbed Love, banged her against the wall, and left her bleeding on the floor. Love's roommate found her body a few hours later. Afterward, police quickly tracked Huguely down. He admitted that he'd gone to see Love, but insisted that they'd done little more than argue. "We were just going to talk," Huguely said. "It was not at all a good conversation we were wrestling. I pushed her onto the bed and left." When police told George Huguely that Love was dead, he was incredulous. "There's no way she can be dead," Huguely repeated. But Yeardley Love was dead, and George Huguely was charged with murder. During his trial in 2012, prosecutors alleged that George Huguely had beaten Yeardley Love to death after drunkenly breaking into her apartment. He was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 23 years in prison. Halfway into his sentence, Huguely took the stand in a wrongful death lawsuit and claimed that he didn't remember most of the attack on Love. He claimed that he didn't remember breaking into her room or injuring her, only that she had a bloody nose. Citing his out-of-control drinking at the time, Huguely told the court that his memory was like a slideshow, and that 98% of the slides from the night of May 2nd had disappeared. "I miss her and think about her every day," Huguely said. "I would do anything to take back that night. I take responsibility for what happened to her, and I should have never gone over to her apartment that night." For Yeardley Love's family, it doesn't matter if George Huguely meant to kill Love or not. The fact of the matter is, he did kill her. "I know he did kill her," Love's mother said. "I know he did. I can't imagine anybody that could even do anything harmful to Yeardley. I don't know what was in his head." Huguely was found liable in the wrongful death lawsuit. Today, George Huguely continues to serve out his prison sentence at Virginia's Beaumont Correctional Center, and despite the tragedy of Yeardley Love's murder, Huguely is scheduled to be released by the time he's 42. People around the world enjoy true crime, but a young South Korean woman's interest in the subject developed into an obsession and, according to police, led her to murder someone to see how it felt. 23-year-old Jung Yoo-Jung confessed to murdering a tutor she found online out of curiosity about murder. "I think I was out of my mind," Jung said. Obsessed with true crime stories, Jung allegedly set out to commit the perfect murder herself. The Chosun Ilbo reports that she meticulously prepared for her crime by searching the internet for how to conceal a body, reading crime books, and watching true crime shows on TV. To find a victim, Jung downloaded an app that connects parents and tutors. She posed as the mother of a 9th-grade girl, hoping to improve her English, and matched with a tutor, whose name has not been released. Then, Jung set a date a few days later for the tutor to meet her daughter. That day, Jung dressed up in a school uniform she'd found at an online flea market and went to her victim's home with a knife. Jung is short, and with the uniform on, the victim probably mistook her for a middle school student, a police spokesman said. When her victim led her in the door, Jung stabbed her to death with the knife. She then went to a store nearby, bought bleach and trash bags, and returned to the victim's home to dismember her. Jung also carefully collected the victim's mobile phone, ID card, and wallet. But Jung made a critical error. To dispose of the body, Jung hired a taxi to take her to a wooded area near the Nakdong River, where Jung dumped a suitcase full of body parts. Jung's behavior struck the driver as deeply suspicious, and he reported her to the police. The police then found blood-stained clothing and bags and some of the victim's body parts at Jung's home. The 23-year-old true crime fanatic had hoped to commit the perfect crime, but was promptly arrested instead. Though Jung initially claimed that she had killed the woman after they had an argument, she eventually admitted the truth after police found holes in her story, and her family urged her to confess what she'd done. Jung also said she feels sorry for what she did, a police spokesman said, noting that Jung was a loner who had been unemployed since graduating from high school. "We are conducting tests to see if she is a psychopath." News of Jung's crime shocked people across South Korea because of its impersonal nature. Jung had no reason to kill, except to satisfy her own curiosity about murder. Jung was found to have premeditated the crime driven by a desire to kill someone after she became obsessed with murder from TV programs and books, the police said. In this case, her obsession was deadly. When police first answered a 911 call about an unresponsive man lying in his yard in Trenton, South Carolina, it seemed like a simple tragedy. Authorities found Joseph McKinnon dead of a heart attack. But then they also found the body of his girlfriend, Patricia Dent, in a nearby pit. McKinnon, police realized, had died while trying to bury his girlfriend's body. Evidence gathered at the scene, along with statements from witnesses, aided investigators to build a timeline, leading us to believe that Mr. McKinnon attacked Mrs. Dent while inside their home, Sheriff Jody Rowland and Coroner David Burnett of Edgefield County stated. Their statement added, Mr. McKinnon then bound her and wrapped her in trash bags before putting her in the previously dug pit. The pit was then partially filled in by Mr. McKinnon. While covering the pit, Mr. McKinnon had the cardiac event, causing his death. As Rowland stated, police swiftly determined that McKinnon had died of a heart attack when they arrived at the scene. There was no trauma to his body, and he seemed to have died of natural causes. However, he added, we had a hard time finding his significant other. After searching the home that McKinnon and Dent shared, police reached out to Dent's colleagues at the Mount Vintage Golf Club in North Augusta. Her co-workers said that Dent had uncharacteristically missed work that morning and that she hadn't responded to any messages. Police then searched the premises. After finding blood inside McKinnon and Dent's home, they returned to the garden where McKinnon had died while filling in a large pit. A neighbor had told police that McKinnon had dug the pit for a new water feature. But police found something else inside. We got down in the pit and started digging around, Rowland said. We uncovered it enough that we found black garbage bags. Inside the bags, police found the body of bound and bruised body of Patricia Dent. An autopsy confirmed what police had suspected. McKinnon had died of cardiac arrest. Dent had been strangled. Police believe that after hitting then choking Dent, McKinnon had bound her with tape, then wrapped her body in garbage bags. He brought it to their garden, where he suffered a heart attack as he tried to bury her. He was feverishly covering the pit, and so we just kind of put things together, Rowland stated. He attacked her, killed her, put her in the pit, and he died covering her up. Basically, Rowland added, this case is over, but the tragedy of Patricia Dent's murder has just started. Her twin sister described her devastation about Dent's death in a post on Facebook. My life is now forever changed, Pamela Briggs wrote. What am I going to do without her? I'm so broken. I loved my twin with my everything. Briggs added, I'm shocked. I didn't see any of this coming. Everybody who ever met her liked her. She was just full of energy and working at 65. I would say a nightmare, and I want to wake up. And it's a dream. I know it's not. This is reality and life. And a big part of me is gone. And now I'm going to have to live with that. Police noted that McKinnon and Dent had had no known history of domestic violence, and that police had never been called before to their Trenton residence before. Indeed, it seems that if Joseph McKinnon hadn't suffered a heart attack while burying Patricia Dent, his girlfriend may have simply vanished. In November 2022, Ashley Jones and her mother, Marcia Allen, allegedly put a nefarious plan into motion. According to police, the two women were plotting to kill Marcia's husband, Harold Allen, and they started conducting research on various poisons that would do the job. Their search reportedly led them to purchase foxglove seeds, which are highly toxic and can even be deadly when ingested. Marcia allegedly put these seeds in chili and brownies that she then fed to Harold, but when they only made him ill, the women switched directions. Court documents claim that they then ordered ethylene glycol, the chemical in antifreeze, and laced Harold's root beer float with it. Police initially had no suspicions of foul play surrounding Harold's death on December 20th, 2022. But 9 months later, on September 19th, 2023, that all changed. Then, Marcia called the police to report an attempted burglary in her home, the same home where her husband had died nearly a year earlier. 2 men were identified as suspects in the burglary, Nathaniel Napier and Stephen White. When police brought them in for questioning, however, White's story unexpectedly shed a new light on the death of Harold Allen. White told investigators that he and Napier had been asked to burglarize the home by none other than Ashley Jones. Even more shockingly, White informed police that Ashley had told him she and Marcia were responsible for poisoning Harold. Marcia Allen denied this when detectives spoke to her. She also consented to a search of her phone, which allegedly revealed a number of incriminating texts. In Marcia's cell phone, there were many text messages, beginning in November 2022, between Marcia and Ashley, in which the two discussed poisoning Harold, the court documents noted. Documents also state that Marcia had searched online queries such as what happens if you eat foxglove seeds, how much foxglove is fatal, and how long does foxglove take to kill you, just before texting Ashley to state that she wanted to purchase foxglove seeds. In late November, Harold Allen visited the hospital with complaints of numbness on one side of his face, a common sign of foxglove toxicity. Days later, he returned with even more symptoms of poisoning, including diarrhea, stomach pains, and vomiting. The foxglove was making Harold Allen sick, but it wasn't killing him. So, Ashley Jones and Marcia Allen allegedly decided to change strategies. They reportedly placed an order for ethylene glycol instead. Ethylene glycol is a colorless, odorless, sweet-tasting compound used in consumer products, including antifreeze. Ingestion of ethylene glycol can result in death in humans, court documents read. On December 19, 2022, police say Ashley Jones texted her mother, "The mail is here," to which Marcia Allen later responded, "He's all in for root beer floats." A day after this text exchange, Harold Allen died. Marcia texted Ashley at 7:55 a.m. on December 20th, asking her to come here, at which point she allegedly told her daughter that Harold was acting drunk and loopy. 5 hours later, Marcia called an ambulance, but Harold was already dead. Ashley Jones was arrested on October 3, 2023, on charges related to Harold's murder. A further search of her phone revealed that she had been texting Stephen White and bragging, "I planned it all." Jones also allegedly complained that her mother needed her help to get into a dead man's phone and get all his retirements and savings he had hidden. In the message, she claimed that she helped her mother take $4,500 from Allen's PayPal credit card before the company could learn of his death, and she was upset that she did not receive any of it. "I showed her how to scam it as him before they find he's gone. She's fake," she allegedly wrote. "She didn't give me anything out of that." On October 16th, police re-examined Marcia Allen's home and questioned her about her husband's death. She was found dead herself later that day. The investigation into Marcia's death is ongoing, but suicide is suspected, court documents state. Ashley Jones, meanwhile, faces charges for murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and consumer product tampering. On July 12, 2021, a teenager wandering through Greenbelt River Trail Park outside of Mitchell, Iowa, came across a horrific sight: a human skull impaled on a stick. After determining that the skull belonged to 29-year-old Angela Nicole Bradbury, investigators have charged 23-year-old Nathan Gilmore with first-degree murder. Gilmore and Bradbury crossed paths in April 2021 at the Cerro Gordo County Courthouse. Gilmore was there for a court hearing. Bradbury had been arrested for trespassing. The two apparently hit it off, and Bradbury allegedly left with Gilmore in the direction of St. Ansgar. But the 29-year-old, who was about to celebrate her birthday, was never seen alive again. After her family reported her missing, in February 2022, authorities confirmed that the impaled head and additional remains discovered in the park back in July belonged to Bradbury. Then, investigators started to retrace Bradbury's last known steps. Their investigation revealed some gruesome clues and led them straight to Gilmore. Gilmore had left a trail of grisly evidence behind. On August 26, 2021, he messaged a male friend of his ex-girlfriend and warned that he'd end up like the body they found outside Mitchell. Gilmore went on, writing, "The bubbling noise blood makes when air passes through the hole in the neck, before it reaches the mouth, makes me hard." About a year after Gilmore sent the Snapchat message, police executed a search warrant on his home. Bradbury's family had provided DNA and dental records, which helped to identify her body, and investigators had begun to piece together that she and Gilmore had met back in April 2021. The search warrant turned up some significant clues. A drawing was found affixed to a whiteboard in Gilmore's living room. This drawing depicted a satanic goat's head in the shape of a pentagram with what appeared to be blood spatters drawn on it. Written on the drawing, next to the goat head, were the numbers 0406, 0590, and 43.392.8. Investigators believe that the numbers are a concrete link between Gilmore and Bradbury. They think that 0406 represents the last day Bradbury was seen alive. 0590 could be an Urban Dictionary acronym slang for someone is tired of living, and 43.392.8 could be GPS coordinates for Greenbelt River Trail Park, where Bradbury's remains were found. What's more, investigators say that Gilmore changed his story multiple times. Gilmore initially said that he'd been in Greenbelt River Trail Park when Bradbury's skull was discovered, which was how he knew about the case. Then he admitted to meeting a woman at the Cerro Gordo County Courthouse, but claimed that he'd dropped her off. He changed his story again, according to investigators, when shown Facebook data that proved that he'd been at the park on April 6th. For now, Gilmore is being held on $1 million cash, only bail, and Bradbury's family is left to mourn her loss. According to Bradbury's obituary, she grew up in Mason City and had a special place in her heart for animals. She was always kind to the underdogs among us, and those who knew her were blessed by her hugs, beautiful smile, and special little giggle, the obituary read. She will be sadly missed by many family and friends. An Oklahoma cannibal who castrated a volunteer with his husband at a holiday cabin before freezing his victim's testicles and talking of eating them has been jailed for 12 years. Bob Lee Allen, 54, was previously set for trial at LaFleur County District Court, but struck a plea deal with prosecutors on August 31, 2021. Allen's husband, Thomas Evan Gates, 43, who handed Allen the surgical tools during the makeshift operation, was freed on time served after admitting misdemeanor maiming in August of 2021. The shocking incident led sheriff's deputies on a thorough investigation of the cabin, where they found medical equipment, bloody towels and tissues and drugs, and a pair of frozen testicles in a bag. The plea deal for Allen came before his trial was set to take place. Gates agreed to testify against his spouse to reach a plea agreement. It is unclear if the couple's marriage, held in September 2020, just a month before the botched operation, has survived Gates' willingness to snitch. The couple performed a castration surgery on October 12, 2020, at their Airbnb cabin called Bob's Weekend Wonders Mountain Retreat on a 28-year-old victim who they found online. The volunteer still remains unidentified, with the couple subsequently charged because they were not licensed to perform surgery. According to the volunteer, Allen had advertised that he performed the surgeries and that he videoed them for his own pleasure on his website, Eunuch Maker. The volunteer traveled from Virginia to the cabin in Oklahoma for the surgery, which Allen said he'd perform for free. He said that Allen assured him he'd done the surgery many times, telling him no ER, no morgue. He was awake for the 2-hour procedure and had only received numbing injections in and around his genitalia. Allen allegedly advertised the service on his own website offering free surgical services. Once it was over, Allen reportedly told the volunteer he was going to eat his penis and that he kept others in a freezer. Those testicles were later found in a freezer during a police search, although it is unclear if Allen followed through on his statement about eating any of them. Afterward, the makeshift surgery, the volunteer lost a considerable amount of blood, but Allen told him he would not take him to the hospital, claiming instead he would dump him in the woods. He also told him once of a man who he'd left to bleed out on the table overnight, because the man was crazy. It is unclear if Allen was joking. Allen claimed to have 6 other people on their way to the cabin to undergo the surgery. Eventually, they decided the man needed medical care, so dropped him off at McAllister Regional Health Center, where he relayed the story to staff. The pair then tried to visit him in hospital. They'd told him to tell doctors that he performed the procedure on himself. Police searched the cabin on October 15th of 2020 and found a freezer in Allen's bedroom, which contained testicles. They also found a 6-foot-tall medicine cabinet full of various medications, medical utensils, mushrooms in pill bottles, a cautery tool with blood, xylocaine, and more. Allen and Gates were charged with conspiracy to commit unlicensed surgery felony, practicing medicine without a license, unlicensed surgery felony, maiming, unlawful use of communication facility, distribution of CDS including possession with intent to distribute, assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, failure to bury dead human member misdemeanor, possession of controlled dangerous substance, unlawful possession of drug paraphernalia misdemeanor. Allen pleaded no contest to felony counts of conspiracy to commit unlicensed surgery, practicing medicine without a license, and attempted distribution of a psychedelic mushroom. He also pleaded no contest to 2 misdemeanor counts and was sentenced to 2 years in jail and 10 years in prison. He also owes more than $5,000 in fines and other costs. The felony maiming charges and 2 misdemeanors were dropped as a result of his plea deal. Gates, who was released in September 2021, owes more than $2,000 in fines and costs. He previously pleaded guilty to 3 misdemeanor charges to prosecutors on August 2021. Police in Northern California have charged a man with identity theft and forgery after they discovered that he's been living with his dead roommate's body for the past 4 years and allegedly cashing the man's checks. 57-year-old Darren Pirtle of Chico is accused of forging checks to himself from his former roommate, 64-year-old Kevin Olson, who had not been heard from since October 2018, according to interviews with his relatives. Olson's family told police that they tried multiple times over the years to get in touch with him, but they always wound up speaking to Pirtle, who offered a litany of excuses for Olson's absence. Finally, police conducted a search of the home after beginning a missing persons investigation in August. Pirtle told police that Olson was out of town, but when they searched the house, they discovered Olson's body on the floor of a back bedroom of the property. They believe Olson died sometime in late 2018, but authorities are waiting on an official autopsy report to determine the actual cause of death. Olson was retired from the United States Navy and had been receiving retirement funds directly to his Navy Federal Credit Union account. Sometime around July 2019, Pirtle began forging checks under Olson's name to move funds from that account to his own. Records also show that throughout this time period, Olson's mortgage continued to be paid. District Attorney Mike Ramsey said that based on the condition of Olson's body, investigators requested the assistance of anthropologists and the Department of Justice Crime Lab in Chico. In total, Pirtle forged around 50 checks from Olson's account to himself. A news station spoke with Olson's neighbors on the 2600 block of Burnap Avenue. They were shocked by the investigation and said the neighborhood is typically a very quiet place. However, they did note that they rarely saw anyone in Olson's home. One woman, who wishes to remain anonymous, told reporters, "The officer had asked me if I showed you a picture of Olson. Would you be able to identify him? And I said no, because I've never seen him, really." Another neighbor, Matthew Donnelly, said he sometimes saw Pirtle while walking his dog, but couldn't remember the last time he'd seen Olson. "It could be longer, but it's been at least a year since I've seen him or seen the truck move." So far, police say there is no evidence of foul play in Olson's death, but they will know more when the autopsy report comes back. Pirtle's bail is currently set at over $1 million. He was sentenced to 2 years of felony probation for stealing from his dead roommate. Kevin Olson, according to Butte County District Attorney Mike Ramsey. Ramsey said, Darren Pirtle, 57, was sentenced for identity theft and 10 counts of forgery. Pirtle will receive credit for the 100 days he spent in jail and will have to pay nearly $70,000 in restitution to the Defense Finance and Accounting Service, Ramsey said. He cannot have an account that allows checks to be drawn and cannot possess any checks except for a paycheck payable to him. John List appeared to be the perfect son, husband, and father. He worked hard as an accountant at a nearby bank to provide for his family. The New Jersey mansion he inhabited with his mother, wife, and 3 children had 19 rooms, including a ballroom, marble fireplaces, and a Tiffany skylight. List and his family were the embodiment of the American dream in 1965. They attended church every Sunday as devout Lutherans, and List taught Sunday school. Everything looked great on the surface, but almost nothing was as it seemed. In 1971, John List lost his job at the bank at age 46. Subsequent jobs didn't pan out. He couldn't bear to tell his family about the loss of income. So he spent his days at the train station, reading the newspaper and secretly skimming money from his mother's bank accounts to pay the mortgage. He refused to go on welfare, as it would entail excruciating embarrassment in the community and violate the principles of self-sufficiency that he learned at his father's knee. It's hard to believe the solution he arrived at would have been more acceptable to his father. But John List would later say it seemed to him the only option: the murder of his mother, wife, and children. One day in late 1971, John List shot and killed his wife, Helen, his 16-year-old daughter, Patricia, his 15-year-old son, John, his 13-year-old son, Frederick, and his mother, Alma, aged 85. They were shot methodically, one by one. Helen was first. List saw the children off to school and then shot her in the kitchen as she sipped her customary morning coffee. Then he went up to the 3rd floor and murdered his mother in her bed. He killed Patricia when she returned home from school. Then the youngest son, Frederick. He made himself a sandwich, closed out his bank accounts, and cheered for his only surviving son, John, at his high school soccer game. He gave him a ride home, then shot him in the chest. John List laid the bodies of his family members on top of sleeping bags in the ballroom, then composed a note to his pastor, who he felt would understand. He feared his family, confronted with a world full of evil and poverty, would turn from God. This was the only way to ensure their safe arrival in heaven. He was not, however, willing to suffer the earthly consequences of his actions. In an effort to baffle the police, he cleaned the crime scenes and used scissors to remove his image from every photo in the mansion. He canceled all deliveries and contacted his children's schools to let their teachers know the family would be on vacation for a few weeks. He turned on the lights and the radio, leaving religious hymns playing in the house's empty rooms. He slept in the mansion where his family lay dead, then walked out the door the next morning and wasn't seen again for 18 years. A month passed before neighbors, curious about the constantly burning lights and empty windows, began to suspect something was wrong at the List mansion. When authorities entered the Westfield, New Jersey house on December 7, 1971, they heard organ music piped through the intercom system. They also found the 5-page note from John List explaining that the bloodied bodies on the ballroom floor were his family members, killed out of mercy. He had saved the souls of the people he loved. The FBI found his car parked at Kennedy International Airport in New York City, but they never found him. The trail went cold. Fast forward 18 years to 1989. New Jersey prosecutors had come up with a plan. They had an expert forensic artist, Frank Bender create a physical bust of John List, as Bender imagined he might have aged. Bender gave him a hawk nose, grizzled eyebrows, and horn-rimmed glasses. Psychologists theorized that List would wear the same spectacles he wore as a younger man to remind him of more successful days. It was a masterful depiction of John List. When America's Most Wanted aired the story of the John List murders on May 21, 1989, an audience of 22 million saw Frank Bender's sculpture. Tips came pouring in. One tip came from a woman in Richmond, Virginia, who thought her next-door neighbor, Robert Clark, bore a striking resemblance to the bust. The tipster said her neighbor was also an accountant and attended church. Authorities went to Clark's home and spoke to his wife, whom he met at a church social gathering. Her story put an end to the 18-year-long mystery. It turned out that List had changed his identity and moved to Colorado under the assumed name Robert Clark. The alias worked, and he kept it when he moved to Richmond. Police in Virginia arrested mass murderer John List on June 1, 1989, a mere 9 days after America's Most Wanted aired his case. At his trial in 1990, defense lawyers argued that List suffered from PTSD from his military service in World War II and Korea. Expert psychologists believed rather that List was going through a midlife crisis, and as the prosecution pointed out, that was no excuse for killing 5 innocent people. The jury finally found John List guilty, and a judge sentenced him to 5 life terms in a New Jersey prison. In an interview with Connie Chung in 2002, List said he didn't kill himself after killing his own family, because he felt that would prevent him from getting to heaven. All List wanted was to reunite with his wife, mother, and children in the afterlife, where he believed there would be no pain or suffering. John List died in prison in 2008 at age 82. The mansion in New Jersey where John List lived with his family burned down several months after the murders. Authorities never found the cause of the fire, and a new house was built on the property years later. The memory of the murders still haunts Westfield residents. In an interview in 2008, parents told a reporter in New Jersey that children will not walk past that property, nor do they even want to live on the same street. But who can blame them? Gary Heidnik was every bit as twisted as the infamous movie character he inspired, Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs. He used his victims as sex slaves, forced them to torture each other, and even ground one of their bodies up and forced the other women to eat her flesh. And yet, to the 50 members of his Philadelphia congregation in the 1980s, the real-life Buffalo Bill killer was the honorable and charismatic Bishop Heidnik, head of the United Church of the Ministers of God. They would meet every Sunday inside his home to hear his unique spin on the Bible. Could they have ever imagined that, in the basement under their feet, Gary Heidnik, the real-life Buffalo Bill killer, had 6 women chained up in a pit? Gary Heidnik, born in Eastlake, Ohio on November 22, 1943, eventually learned how to control people after having a rough start to his life. He'd suffered through a brutal childhood, during which he claimed his father abused him and mercilessly mocked the young boy's bedwetting. His troubles continued throughout high school, where he remained isolated from his peers and socially stunted before joining the Army after graduation. Following his discharge due to mental health issues, namely schizoid personality disorder, after just 13 months, Heidnik worked briefly as a nurse before finding a way to control other people via religion. Gary Heidnik started the United Church of the Ministers of God in 1971 in Philadelphia with just 5 followers and a $1,500 investment. But things grew wildly from there. He eventually raised more than $500,000 for his cult. Furthermore, he learned how to manipulate people, and he put that skill to use on the women he'd started keeping locked up in his basement. Heidnik had been charged with crimes related to sexual assault before, but never served any significant time for them. He'd even been charged with the spousal rape of Betty Disto, a Filipino mail-order bride he wed in 1985 and who left him in 1986, but not before bearing him a son, Jesse. In fact, Heidnik had 2 other children with 2 different women, both of whom had also complained of his deviant sexual practices and penchant for locking them up. But those tendencies were about to reach new depths, as he would soon kidnap 6 black women to rape and torture. Gary Heidnik captured the woman conventionally cited as his first victim, Josefina Rivera, in 1986. And it's hard to imagine, but he actually turned her, by many accounts, into an accomplice of sorts. The way he initially captured her, though, was as brutal as the capture of any of his other victims. Like all of the women that the real-life Buffalo Bill killer targeted, Rivera was a sex worker, lured into his home by the promise of money. While Rivera was getting her clothes back on after they had sex, Heidnik came up from behind and choked her. Then, he dragged her down to his basement, shackled her limbs together with chains, and sealed the bolts in with super glue. Her life flashed before her eyes. All I could remember was, like, a film projector of things that were going on in my life. Rivera would later say of the experience, "It was like, just flipping back." Gary Heidnik then beat her with a stick until she stopped screaming for help. Then, he threw her into a pit, boarded it up, and sealed her in. The only light that seeped in came through thin cracks in a wood covering overhead. He would kidnap 5 more women in just 3 months, all in the same way that Rivera was abducted. All of the victims were black, because, as Heidnik's lawyer would later reveal, he was trying to enslave 10 black girls to have a baby with all of them, and he was going to create a perfect race. Much like Rivera, the other victims were choked, chained up, thrown into the pit, and boarded up inside, only pulled out to be raped or tortured. Any time that you're cut off from the world outside, Josefina Rivera admitted after she escaped her captor's clutches, whoever's holding you captive, you're going to grow to like him regardless, because he's your only contact to things that are outside. He's your only source of survival. Rivera eventually convinced Heidnik that she was on his side, and he made her the boss of the other women. It was his way of pitting the women against each other. If Rivera did what he said, he'd bring her hot chocolate and hot dogs and let her sleep outside of the hole. But he made one thing clear: if she disobeyed him, she could lose all of her privileges. Going against him was dangerous. When one of the women displeased him, Heidnik would put them on punishment. They would be starved, beaten, and tortured. Sometimes, he would wrap duct tape around their mouths and slowly jam a screwdriver into their ears, just to watch them squirm. If Rivera was going to keep her privileges, she understood. She had to aid in the torture of the other women. Once, he had her fill the pit full of water, attach a stripped extension cord to the other women's chains, and electrocute them while he watched. The shock was so painful that one of the women, Deborah Dudley, was electrocuted to death. Heidnik barely reacted. "Yeah, she's dead," he said after checking her body. "Now I can get back to having a peaceful basement." After Dudley's brutal murder, another horrific death occurred in the basement. The murder of Sandra Lindsay, a mentally disabled woman who Gary Heidnik had lured in shortly after he abducted Rivera. Lindsay couldn't handle the abuse as long as the others did, so Gary Heidnik put her on punishment and starved her for days. When he tried to give her food again, she didn't move. He released her chains and she collapsed. The women were only allowed a few moments to panic. When they started screaming at the sight of their friend, who they now realized was dead, Heidnik told them to cut out their bullshit, or they would die next. He then dragged Lindsay's body upstairs and cut it into pieces. He cooked her ribs in the oven, boiled her head on the stove. Neighbors' complaints of the smell prompted a police visit, but he claimed he'd just absent-mindedly burned a roast and put her arms and legs in a freezer. Then, he ground her flesh up, mixed it with dog food, and brought it down to the other women. 3 of the women were still on punishment. A few days before, he'd let them watch TV, and one had angered him by saying she was so hungry that the dog food in an ad looked good enough to eat. She'd get dog food, Heidnik told her, and she and the other 2 women would eat it, with Lindsay's body parts mixed in it, though some sources refute this account and say that Heidnik made it up to support an insanity defense later. It would plague them for the rest of their lives, but they didn't have much of a choice. They had to either cannibalize their dead friend or they would die. As one of the women, Jacqueline Askins, would later say, "If it wasn't for me eating her or eating dog food, I couldn't be here today." Ultimately, accomplice or not, Josefina Rivera saved the surviving victims. Toward the end, Heidnik was using her as bait to catch more women. He'd let her enter the outside world to help him pick up other potential victims and lure them into his home, always keeping her close by his side. She used the goodwill she'd earned to get these temporary trips out of the basement. And then, on March 24, 1987, after helping Heidnik abduct a 7th victim, Rivera managed to convince him to let her go for just a few minutes so that she could briefly visit her family members. He would wait at the gas station, they agreed, and she'd come right back. Rivera walked around the corner and out of his sight. Then, she rushed over to the nearest phone and called 911. Officers promptly arrested Gary Heidnik right there at the gas station, and then raided his house of horrors. After 4 months of imprisonment, the women were finally free, and furious with Rivera. Even though she had freed them, they were still angry about the role she played in their torture, especially Dudley's death. Some even wanted Rivera to be charged as an accomplice. But in the end, Rivera was recognized as a victim as Heidnik was forced to face the court. Despite his attempts to get off on an insanity defense, Gary Heidnik was convicted in July 1988 and sentenced to death. He tried to kill himself in prison, and his family tried to get him off death row, but all to no avail. Finally, on July 6, 1999, Heidnik received a lethal injection and became the last person to be executed in the state of Pennsylvania. A decade earlier, while he was still in prison, Heidnik's infamous legacy in pop culture was secured when he inspired the character of Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. The character's house of horrors and penchant for keeping women confined in a basement pit recalled Heidnik's crimes. As for Heidnik's cult, it's hard to say how much they knew. Even after he was arrested, they kept coming to church. While every news channel was blaring stories about Heidnik's den of victims and the way he abused them, his followers kept coming out to his house for Sunday services. At least one follower, a man named Tony Brown, helped Heidnik torture the women. He thought of himself as Gary Heidnik's best friend. He was there when Heidnik starved Lindsay to death, and when Heidnik dismembered her body and wrapped her limbs up and labeled them dog meat. Brown, however, was mentally disabled. He was a victim of Heidnik's manipulation, according to his lawyer, a man who fit the pattern of Heidnik's victims. He's poor, retarded, and black. According to Heidnik's neighbors, the members of his cult fit this description as well. He held these church services on Sunday. A lot of people came, one of his neighbors recalled. They were usually mentally retarded. Like Rivera, Gary Heidnik's followers were victims of his manipulation. But in a way, that's perhaps the most terrifying part of the story. Gary Heidnik wasn't just an unhinged sadist, willing to rape, torture, murder, and even cannibalize a basement full of women. He got people to help. If you enjoyed the video, please show your support by subscribing and liking the video. And turn on all notifications so you don't miss any future uploads.